Hello again, dear friends, and welcome back to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's set you up some more great stories so we can get in that cozy mood and just while the day away. Today's theming is odd children and the strange things they get up to. So let's start off with a childhood classic. One of those objects we see so often in an elementary school class, but we never really think about. No matter what you call it, let's hear a story about a chatterbox.
She died very suddenly, though none of us could have known what lay inside her. Her name was Kimmy Wynn, and she was from Korea or Singapore, somewhere like that. We never learned much about Kimmy. Her family didn't speak very good English, though, but Kimmy spoke it well enough to understand the lessons. We tried to befriend her, but Kimmy was shy, and I'm ashamed to say that we took to bullying her. We were in elementary school and extremely cliquey. Kimmy was an outsider. She wore strange clothes. She didn't speak like we did, and we made fun of her for it. Most days, she just sat in the back of class, sat on the pavilion at recess, and said little to nothing. When she died, it surprised everyone. Kimmy lived in a small apartment complex in a not-so-great part of town. Her family worked for her uncle, Mr. June, who owned a market in the neighborhood they lived in. Kimmy had been working there after school, helping her parents pay the bills, and she'd been making a delivery on her bike when someone had abducted her. They found her bike just sitting on the curb, wheels spinning slowly, and the police didn't seem hopeful in their investigations. Her kidnapping was all the buzz around school, and my friends wanted to talk about little else. Marissa, our sort of leader, said she bet that Kimmy had just made the whole thing up so that people would be friends with her after she was found. Leanna said that she shouldn't say things like that, but you could tell she didn't really feel very scandalized. She said she'd be praying for her, praying that they'd find her safe, but even at 10, I doubted it. I kept my mouth shut on the matter, personally thinking it was terrible. No one should just be grabbed off their bike as they tried to help their family. A week later, they found her body in an empty lot near her uncle's shop. Mom wouldn't let me watch the news report about it, but Marissa said that the newsman had said that she was chopped into little pieces and left there. The news thinks it might have been something to do with her uncle, but they don't seem to know much about it. A service was held for her at the local Korean Baptist church, and I saw a picture of her parents lighting a little paper boat and floating it out for her. Her two sisters, one of whom was in the first grade, were there too, and I remember thinking how awful it would be to lose someone like that. My own sister wasn't very nice, but I still didn't want anything like that to happen to her. A few days later, Miss Hurd stopped me as I was going out to recess and asked if I would put the stuff from Kimmy's desk into a box. Her parents are coming at the end of the day, and I really need to be outside with the other children. Just put it on my desk and come outside when you're done. I saw the pack of Marlboros in her hand and guessed that child-minding probably wasn't the only thing on her mind. Marissa stayed to help me, and I found that Kimmy's desk was surprisingly neat. My desk looked like a garage sale, but Kimmy's desk was very organized, and it was easy to pack her stuff away. Marissa cooed over her Hello Kitty pencil box, but I reminded her that we weren't allowed to take her stuff. The pencil box, her notebooks, her folders, and a cute little art supply case went into the box too, along with a Hello Kitty eraser and a pencil set. Marissa looked over it all greedily, but I wasn't trying to get in trouble for taking anything from a dead student, especially not when the teacher had trusted me to pack it. We were loading some of her notebooks when a small purple book fell out of the middle of them. Marissa pounced on it before I could even fully register what it was. I told her to give it back, that it didn't belong to her, but Marissa was already opening it and leafing through it. "Oh, no way! It's her journal! Give it, Marissa. It isn't yours. We need to put it in the box before someone sees it." "No way. No one knows about it, so who's going to miss it? Unless," Marissa got a mean look on her face, "you're going to tattle on me." I stopped complaining then and let her slide the journal into her pocket. Marissa and I had been friends since first grade, but I hadn't forgotten how mean she could be either. She had bullied me in kindergarten for the better part of the first half of the year, until I'd come to school with a brand new backpack one day, and she had fallen in love with it. Marissa had said someone with a backpack that cool had to be friends with her and Leanna, and I had been part of their clique ever since. That had only been 3 years ago, though, and I wasn't in a big hurry to go back to the way things had been. Marissa and I were friends, but Marissa could be mean when she wanted to be. I won't tattle, I said softly, more to myself than to her. Good, she said, snatching the pencil case out before I could get the lid on. I set the box on the desk, and I made sure that Marissa was out of the classroom before I left. I didn't want her doubling back to grab anything else out of there. The idea to make the chatterbox was Marissa's, as so many other bad ideas usually were. She read the journal to us at recess, taking delight every time she or Leanna were mentioned. My name came up a few times, though it was usually by association. It appeared that Kimmy had been keeping a journal of people and how they had wronged her, as well as how they had wronged others. Quite the little spider was Kimmy, hiding away and listening to people as they gossiped or went about their lives. Marissa said, getting a mischievous look. I've got an idea. She turned to the back and tore out an unused page, beginning to write the predictions for her chatterbox. If you're unfamiliar with the item, it's probably because it has a million names. I've heard them called fortune tellers, whirly birds, paku paku, salt sellers, cootie catchers, and any number of other things. Sometimes when I post about them online, I get little fights started over what they're called. People have 1,000 different names for them, but they seem to be something known worldwide. They are little devices that you put numbers in, picking numbers randomly until you get your fortunes and learn your fate. Marissa had already started writing the same old things she always wrote on the wedges anytime she made one of these. They were never very creative, usually things like you'd marry a millionaire, that you'd be a princess, that you'd have 20 children, that sort of thing. She was always very predictable, but she never seemed to include anything bad in her predictions. Marissa, despite being a bit of a brat, didn't like for bad things to happen to her or her friends. When she made the chatterbox, it was always the best outcomes. Okay, pick a number. I looked at the chatterbox questioningly. What are you doing? Isn't it obvious? If Kimmy knew so many secrets, then maybe she won't mind telling us our future. The idea of using a dead girl's paper to tell our fortunes made me shudder, and I shook my head as she turned to Leanna. Come on, Lee, let me tell your future. I guess it couldn't hurt, Leanna said. 5. Marissa opened and closed the device very fast, before holding out for her to pick another number. 7, she said, smiling a little as the paper creature plopped open and closed very quickly. 3, she finished, and Marissa opened the flap. You should tell Jana what you... But Marissa stopped suddenly. She seemed to realize that she had read words before she had quite put together what they had said. Tell Jana what? Leanna said, smiling but looking a little nervous. Marissa looked at me. Did you write something on this while I wasn't looking? No. When would I have had a chance? Marissa started to call me a liar, but she huffed out a hey as Leanna took the chatterbox and looked at the tab. She looked confused when she got the chatterbox away from her, but she looked angry after she read what was on the tab. You should tell Jana what you did to Mark at the lake. She tossed the little paper thing in Marissa's lap. I told you that in confidence. I only kissed him because you said that I should. Lee, I didn't write that. But Leanna was already storming away, heading for the picnic tables. Marissa looked back at me, holding the paper craft out as though inviting me to take my turn. I don't really want to do it. It feels kind of creepy. Oh my God, Marissa groaned, deep in her throat. Here, I'll do it. She picked numbers at random, moving her fingers very quickly as she selected her fortune. Marissa looked mad, furious even, but that didn't seem to stop her from selecting numbers and finding out what her fortune might be. The fortune that Leanna had read had shocked her, and she was interested in finding the ones that she had written so she could feel okay again. It was a fluke, she must be thinking, and now she was going to prove it. She opened tab number 3, and I could see her hands shaking as she read it. Felicia doesn't like you. She pretended to because her mom asked her to. She looked at me suspiciously, but I just put my hands up and looked at the words inside. It's not even either of our handwritings. Your handwriting is swoopy, and mine is super sloppy. This handwriting is way too neat to be either of ours." Marissa looked at the handwriting, and then flipped open the journal as if looking for the source of it. She stared at a few of the pages before slamming the book shut and taking the chatterbox with her. I asked her where she was going, but she didn't answer. Turns out she was going on a tour of the playground. I didn't realize what was going on until a group of angry kids approached the playground monitor with a frantic Marissa in tow. The lead girl, Felicia Spaulding, looked livid, and Marissa was trying to tell her how sorry she was with every step she took. "Miss Conway, Marissa's telling lies about my friends and me." Miss Conway, a broad, beefy, grandmotherly woman with hands like slabs of meat, looked at Marissa and then back to Felicia. "What's going on, girls? What's this about lies?" "I didn't write it," Marissa wailed, waving the chatterbox with her free hand. "She wrote lies about us in her chatterbox. Her box said that my mom had gotten an abortion and that Cindy was adopted." Cindy, the tall girl with the wavy brown hair that hung with Felicia in her clique, was crying and shaking her head. Other kids had similar stories. Some said that her chatterbox had told them that their parents were getting divorced. Others said that it had said it knew things that they had done or things they had said. One of them even claimed that it told him that his aunt would die later that week and that she was in the hospital with cancer. "Marissa, hand that thing over," Miss Conway said, her face growing dour as she listened to the long list of complaints against Marissa. Marissa gave her the folded paper, both hesitant and loath to be rid of it, and she almost cried out in anguish as Miss Conway tore it into pieces. "Next time I hear of something like this, I'll give you after-school detention. Stop writing lies about people, and the rest of you go play." They all dispersed, Marissa looking down at the pieces of the chatterbox as they drifted in the wind. I hadn't walked up with the rest, but I was still close enough to hear Felicia tell her not to expect to go to any of her parties anymore. Marissa changed after that, and it seemed to me that the chatterbox was the reason for it. For the rest of the day, she just sat at her desk and looked down at her lap. I couldn't see what she was fiddling with at first, but eventually I saw it was another one of the chatterboxes. I was shocked. Hadn't she learned her lesson after the first one? Her book was open, but her hands moved below the lip of the desk in a rapid series of jerks and swoops. She would flick it once, twice, 3 times before opening the corresponding flap and reading what it said. Every answer seemed to make her more and more agitated. She would take it off her hands sometimes and seemed on the verge of ripping it to shreds before gently sliding it back on and starting again. "Marissa, would you care to answer number 4 for us?" Miss Hurd asked, drawing my attention back to the front of the class and drawing Marissa out of her stupor. Marissa shoved the chatterbox under her desk and looked down at her open textbook as she searched for number 4. 17? Miss Hurd blinked. "That would be correct if we were still on our math lesson. We've moved on to geography. Are you feeling well, Marissa? You don't seem like yourself today." Marissa turned beet red, digging through her desk to find her book. Miss Hurd had approached her desk, I suppose wanting to see if she might be feverish, and when she stooped to pick something up, I saw that the chatterbox had tumbled out of her desk as Marissa looked for her book. "Oh, what have we here? I remember these from when I was a little girl. We used to use them to tell each other's fortunes. I can't believe kids still make these for..." But as she had been talking, she had opened one of the flaps on the chatterbox. She glanced at the tab as it came fully open, and her words ended as abruptly as they had begun. Marissa looked up at her as her geography book came open, and the look on her face was enough to tell me that she didn't like what she saw there. "Get up," Miss Hurd whispered, her voice barely containing her rage. Miss Hurd?" Marissa asked, unsure what was happening. "Get your..." She curbed her next words. "Things, and come with me. We're going straight to the principal's office, young lady." Marissa looked up, confused, but collected her things and went with Miss Hurd to the office. She never came back to class, and when I asked Miss Hurd, she only told me that her mother had been called after something she had written in the chatterbox. Marissa was suspended for 5 days. She was taken out of class and put in another 4th grade class away from Leanna and I. Leanna said it served her right for writing lies about people. She made her bed, and now she has to sleep in it. I would have honestly forgiven her, but not after what she said about Miss Hurd. I asked her what she had said, and Leanna leaned in like it was some big secret. I heard that she had written that Miss Hurd was cheating on her husband with Mr. Sizemore. The PE teacher? Yeah, can you imagine? She's lucky she didn't get expelled. When Marissa came back to school, she was a very different girl. She looked frazzled, her red hair looking unkempt. She seemed to be constantly pulling at her clothes. She was nervous and twitchy, and she seemed obsessed with the little chatterbox. She would ask people to pick a space, ask them to make a choice, but most people would just walk past her without speaking. It's tough to be labeled a social pariah at 10 years old. She had lost all of her friends, except for me, and I wasn't even sure I still wanted to be her friend. When I saw her at recess that day, sitting by the fence and fiddling with the chatterbox, I sat beside her and asked if she was okay. I could smell a smell around her, and it wasn't an altogether healthy smell. "I can't let her beat me," she whispered, her face very close to the chatterbox as she worked the mechanism. "Who?" I asked. "Kimmy," she said, just as low, and when she opened the fold on the chatterbox, she sobbed and closed it again before starting. "Mara, Kimmy's dead," I said, using her nickname to try to bring her back to her senses. "Not all the way dead," she said, and when she opened the tab this time, her fingers crumpled the space, and I could read the message written there just before she closed it. "Your mother thinks you're crazy." Marissa pushed me suddenly, and the fence scratched my back as I slid sideways. Through the tears that welled in my eyes, I could see her lunatic's face as she pushed it inches from mine. "That's not your fortune. Don't read other people's fortunes." Miss Conway must have seen something, because she started walking over. I got up and walked away quickly, not looking at Marissa as the playground monitor approached her. That was the last time I spoke to Marissa, but not the last time I saw her. For the next 3 months, I saw her on and off. She became like a wraith who haunted the school. She stopped asking people to look at the chatterbox. She just sat off by herself and played with it, cringing and sobbing every time she opened a flap. The more I saw her, the worse I felt for her, and eventually I decided to try and bury the hatchet. I decided that after school I would go visit her at home and try to see if we could reconcile. I also wanted to see if there was any sanity left in her to save. She hadn't been at school the last couple of days, not that anyone but me had bothered to notice. When I arrived at her house, her mother seemed happy to see me. She told me that Marissa had been feeling poorly lately, and that maybe a friend might cheer her up. Marissa's mother looked like she hadn't slept in a few days, and even at 10, I noticed that she approached Marissa's room like there might be a wild animal behind the door. She knocked, slow and hesitant, and told Marissa that I was here to see her. Marissa said nothing. She knocked again, asking if Marissa was awake. Marissa said nothing. Her mother opened the door slowly, and I could see Marissa sitting at the desk with her back to the door. She never moved when her mother walked over to her, and as I stood in the doorway, I couldn't help but take in what appeared to be the lair of a crazy person. Some of the details would come to me afterward, but many of them were seen in the split second that we often use to see details and assess if a person is a threat or not. The floor was full of chatterboxes, like a flower bed of folded paper, and her mother seemed to be stepping over them gingerly. The outside of them were covered with words, all of them written in that neat, spidery handwriting. The writing on the wall was all Marissa's, though. She had written on the wall in anything she could find. The scrawls were a messy jumble of pen, pencil, paint, charcoal, and even rusty red colors that might have been her own blood in a few places. The words were strange, not making a lot of sense. She watches. She whispers. She tells me, "I'm crazy. I'm insane. I'm a disappointment." She haunts me. Most chilling of all was the rusty red smear of the word Kimmy over the head of her bed, like she had traced it with a bleeding finger. When her mother started to scream, I was turned away from the bloody words as if someone had slapped me. She was screaming Marissa's name again and again, shaking the ragged scarecrow that she had become. She begged me to dial 911, and I ran downstairs to do just that. The paramedics couldn't figure it out. They said it was like her heart had just stopped, and no amount of CPR or defibrillation could bring her back. As they laid her out on the ground, I could see her face frozen in a rictus of fear and shock. Looking to the desk, I saw the chatterbox she had been toting around. It was grimy, covered in fingerprints, but I believe to this day that it was the same one that Miss Conway had destroyed all those weeks ago. The open flap was blank, the surface stark and unmarred. I can't imagine what she could have read there, and I honestly didn't want to find out. I'm in high school now. 8 years have passed, but I still remember the lesson I learned from Marissa. It's unwise to mess around with the possessions of the dead. Their things are better left undisturbed, their memories left unread. It was the last lesson Marissa would ever learn, and she learned it too late. If it's a lesson I ever forget, I have a reminder on my desk every day. You see, when I came home from Marissa's funeral, the chatterbox was sitting on my doorstep. I can't prove it was the same one. I know that it can't be the same one, but that didn't stop me from scooping it up and putting it in my pocket before my mother could see it. I heard it whisper to me that night. Its whispering is little more than a mutter as I sit here writing. It's harder to hear, but it never goes away. That's why I refuse to touch it, let alone use it. Let Marissa and Kimmy keep each other company inside that thing for the rest of time, for all I care. I don't want the knowledge they hold that badly.
That story always makes me think we might have been misusing our chatterboxes, or fortune tellers as we always called them when I was a kid. We only ever wondered who our boyfriends or girlfriends were going to be. We never really asked any questions of cosmic importance, I suppose. Moving right along, we have another story about, well, I suppose it's another common thing in a classroom. You take them so often, you probably don't even think about it. But the child in today's story is changed irreparably because of one. So let's hear a little more about a hall pass.
Have you ever had a dream, maybe a memory from your childhood, so vivid that it almost has to be real? I'm not sure if this actually happened or not, but I've dreamed about it for the last 2 weeks, and I'm terrified that it will never stop. Whenever I close my eyes, it begins again, and each time, it's more vivid than the last. This isn't normal for me. Most days I couldn't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, much less every detail of the dreams I had last night. But I can tell you every single detail of this event as though it happened just a second ago. It's the most terrifying thing that I've ever seen in my 30 years of life. And if it doesn't stop soon, I don't know what I'll do. I was 8 years old when I knew what terror really was. Miss Winkler was teaching us math, her blackboard covered in numbers and mathematical symbols, when my hand came up, my chubby fingers tickling the sky in anticipation. She'd been trying to engage us for about 45 minutes, enticing slivers of answers out of kids who'd rather be playing outside or pretending to be Power Rangers. When my hand came up, she looked so hopeful. Maybe she thought she had finally reached a student, perhaps. Maybe she thought she'd finally had a breakthrough, and a student would begin to return her answers to her. When she called on me, I can still see the hopeful smile that stretched her painted lips as she said my name with great expectation. Unfortunately, I was about to break her heart. "Can I go to the bathroom, Miss Winkler?" I asked in my high, innocent voice. Her face fell, and as an adult, I can understand that disappointment. "Yes, take the hall pass when you go." The hall pass was a ruler with the word hall pass written on it in magic marker. It was smudged from many dirty hands, and as I took it up and left the room, my adult mind wondered how many other hands had touched it over the years. As a kid, all I had wondered about was whether or not I could use it as a convincing lightsaber. I suppose kids do have different priorities, don't they? I swished and buzzed it all the way to the bathroom, and as I came up to the squat little building, I felt nothing besides a need to pee. The brick building was large enough to hold 2 bathrooms, a boys' and a girls', and 4 students comfortably inside each. I remember it being cold and damp in the winter, but I thought it would be mercifully cool on this blistering summer day. As I pushed the door open, I felt cold air ruffle my hair. Today, though, something didn't feel quite right about this place. The darkness was oppressive, pervasive, and even as a child I could feel that something was different. I reached inside and groped for the light switch. My hand slid over the slimy walls but found nothing. I knew there should be a light switch here, but as I scrambled my hand over the moist tiles, I became more and more aware of how badly I needed to pee. I finally decided to just go use the stall in the dark, the dingy windows letting in enough light that I wouldn't be in complete darkness. The door swung shut behind me. I felt the air pull it closed very hard, and the sound echoed off the bathroom walls. The dingy windows showed me 2 urinals and 2 walled-off toilet stalls. I went into one of the stalls, always feeling more comfortable sitting down to use the bathroom, and got comfortable as my bladder began to empty itself. As I started to do my business, I became aware of the strange noise from the stall next to me. The stalls were made of concrete blocks, painted glossy white, but they were not entirely built into the floor. There was a small opening at the bottom, about a foot high, where you could see into the stall next door. As I sat in the greasy semi-light, I heard the sound like mud dripping onto the floor. Every 5 seconds, it would glop, glop, glop onto the floor. Underneath the sound was another, softer, wetter, heavy breathing that was so low it was almost inaudible. I had finished using the bathroom by this point, but the sound mesmerized me. I had never heard anything like it, and I was fascinated and terrified to see what made a sound like that. Slowly I bent down so I could look under the wall, too afraid to simply go open the stall and see what was in there. As my knees bent to the cold concrete and my hands splayed over the rough floor, I brought my eyes down to peek and saw something that I will never forget. If it was dingy dark in my stall, then it was nearly pitch black in the other. As my eyes adjusted, I could see something on the other side that looked like nothing so much as rippling mud or swaying pudding. It was a mass, a wiggling mass of something that nearly blocked out the entire opening. As I watched, it rippled and shook endlessly as the sound of wet, labored breathing only got louder. Before long, it was more than background noise. It covered the dripping gloop with its damp and difficult chorus. I couldn't look away. I couldn't drag myself away from it until something round and angry floated through the muck and seemed to see me seeing it. It was an eye. I was up in a heartbeat, legs drawn up to my chest as I sat on the toilet and clutched myself. I held the ruler to my chest like a makeshift weapon and tried to silence my growing terror as the breathing became growly and agitated. The door burst open on the other stall, and I thanked my lucky stars that I had remembered to lock the door to my own cubicle before starting my business. Whatever was on the other side banged against the door. It sounded like waves crashing against a levee, and all I could do was cower and try not to scream, worried it might excite the creature and push it to further violence. It slammed in again and again, and as it did, I almost thought I could feel flecks of whatever it was made of slapping off and splatting on the ceiling and floor. It battered the door mercilessly, and to my horror, I could see the simple slide lock joggling and shuddering under every blow. The sound it made was like a mudslide, like mud pushing its way through a hallway during a flood, and I just knew that any minute it would break the door and cover me. Then it stopped. Whatever it was gave one final slap against the door, and then rumbled off out of the bathroom. I sat petrified, unable to move for nearly 5 minutes, before I finally found myself able to control my shaking legs. It was gone. Whatever it was gone, but I wanted it to be gone and well gone before I decided to come out. The lock didn't want to open, but it popped open after a few hard slaps with my hand. The door creaked outward on warped hinges, and I could tell that the cubicle door was definitely going to need replacing. As I turned to look at it, I could see several dark stains on the outside where something had slammed its soupy body into it again and again. Something dripped onto my shoulder, and my scream peeled off the walls like a startled bird. I scuttled back on crab legs. My knees had buckled, and I watched as something thick and muddy dripped off the ceiling and fell onto the cracked tile. I looked up to see a dozen or more little stalagmites, or maybe they were stalactites, hanging from the ceiling. They oozed and threatened to fall, their creation having taken place very recently. At that moment, all I wanted to do was get out, to escape, but I should have known that it wouldn't be that easy. When I pushed the door open, it didn't swing out onto the yellowing grass of my school sports field, but onto a shadowy hellscape of swirling lights and acrid smells. My child's mind didn't understand everything, didn't even understand some of the things, but it did understand that there were many moving mountains out there that made the one in the bathroom look like an anthill. The smaller ones congregated around towering fires, the dusty brown earth scraped shiny by their passing, and around them seemed to grind mountains that towered up into the greasy sky. Their tops were illuminated by infrequent forks of lightning. I could see towering rock sentinels made of ever-flowing viscous earth. It was too much. I closed the door and crumpled into a corner between the dripping sink and the wall. I made myself as small as possible. I felt as a bug must feel when it's surrounded by humans, and as my mind tried to process what I had seen, I seemed on the verge of breaking. How could I process something so big without going insane? The smallest of them had been barely able to be contained by this building. The largest of them could have destroyed this building without thinking. My mind could not fathom the sheer size of them, the knowledge of these moving mountains, so I did the only thing I could to keep myself from going insane. I put myself to sleep. The janitor found me there, and when he touched my shoulder, he said I fought and screamed like a cornered animal. He didn't mind, though. He was glad he had found me. It was night when he took me out of the little toilet building, and he had to be very firm with me to get me to go outside into the gloom. I was afraid it was a trick. The dark reminded me of the greasy blackness of that place, and it wasn't until my mother saw us coming out and ran to me that I knew I was back where I belonged. They took me to the principal's office. My dad, my teacher, the principal, the police officers, they were all waiting there for me. My dad hugged me, folding me into his warm embrace, and my teachers and principals asked me where I had been. When the janitor said he had found me in the toilet, my teacher seemed confused, and the police seemed aggravated. "You said you searched the entire school," said the principal, not just to my teacher, but also to the police officers. "We did. We even brought the dogs in. There's no way that kid's been in the bathroom for 2 days. My face must have shown how confused I was as I tried my best to follow the explanation. They told me I'd been missing for 2 days. The school had been searched, a code Adam had been ongoing, and they had searched every place I liked and every friend's house I'd ever been to. I tried to tell them about the monsters, about the weird world full of giant things, but they just shook their heads and said I must have been hiding this whole time. I think my parents were just happy that I was safe, and the principal didn't punish me, even though I sensed that he really wanted to. I think my teacher believed me when I told her I wasn't hiding, holding the hall pass out to her in a shaky hand. She knew I was a good kid, and didn't usually cause more than the average 8-year-old's amount of trouble. She quit the next year, and I was removed from her class at my parents' request. When she saw me in the halls after that, I could swear that she looked almost sad to see me. I haven't thought about that place in years. After it happened, my parents took me to see a psychiatrist, and she helped me put it out of my mind. I would only remember it sometimes in the dark hours of the night, but it was gone just as quickly, even though it comes back in vivid detail, and I don't know how much longer I can handle it. I see the mountains moving as I stand in the doorway of that bathroom. I know that they will end me if they see me. I know that if they see a way to our world, they will end all of us, and I'm afraid of what I'll see the next time I open that door.
Makes me very cautious the next time I just throw open the door to the bathroom. Looks like we might have a bit of a school theme going on this time, so let's continue on with a story about a boy who has a very strange hobby of collecting things. A boy who maybe gets into a little bit of trouble because of said collection. Let's hear a story about too many teeth.
"Daddy, I lost a tooth." He lisped a bit as he said it, and as I held my hand out, I saw that he had, indeed, lost a tooth. It was one of the front ones, and I congratulated him on losing it so cleanly. I wondered if he had pulled it out himself, but I put that out of my mind. Brandon didn't even pull his own splinters out, and I really couldn't see him yanking out his own teeth. He was 6 and 1 month, as he liked to say, and this was the first tooth that he had lost. He was late in that respect. Many of his friends had already started losing baby teeth, but he was giddy as he brought this one to me. "Now the tooth fairy'll come and take it away," he said, skipping off to continue playing. Ah, yes, I'd forgotten about that part. Brandon had become obsessed with the tooth fairy after his friend Nina had lost her tooth. He thought of her like the blue fairy from the Pinocchio story, and he was very excited that she would come through his window and leave money for his teeth. He had asked what she did with all those teeth, where she got all the money, and 1,000 other things. I was a pretty creative person, and I'd come up with all kinds of stories about what she did with them, where she got the money, and how she came in without making a sound. On and on and on. I was kind of glad that he had finally lost a tooth, because I was starting to run out of material and thought if he experienced it, he might lose interest in it. We put it under his pillow that night, and I assured him that it would be gone in the morning and there would be money when he got up. Then, of course, I fell asleep waiting for my wife to get home and woke up to find her sleeping beside me and the sun already peeking over the horizon. I went quickly but quietly and thanked my lucky stars that Brandon was a sound sleeper. He hadn't woken up yet, and I took the $1 I was going to put under his pillow out of my pocket and prepared to make the swap. To my surprise, however, the tooth was already gone. No one had left money, but the tooth had disappeared. I looked around, thinking it had slipped out, but it was just gone. I left the $1 anyway, not wanting him to be disappointed, and went back to my room to get more shut-eye before the alarm went off. We never made it to the alarm because Brandon came in waving the $1 and saying that the tooth fairy had come. "Look what the tooth fairy left me. He said it was all for me." I told him that was awesome, but internally I raised an eyebrow. He? The tooth fairy had always been a woman any time he'd talked about her before. Maybe, I thought, Brandon had just had a dream or something that night. He put the money in his piggy bank, and I figured we could maybe put the thing behind us. 2 days later, as I put him to bed, I put my hand beneath his pillow and felt something strange. I took my hand out and found another tooth. "What's this?" I asked. "Oh, I lost another tooth," Brandon said. No excitement, no hope that the tooth fairy would come, just a matter-of-fact tone. I guess that was what I wanted. His obsession with the tooth fairy had ended when he finally lost a tooth. He'd gone from being absolutely excited to absolutely unfazed, and that stopped me for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me you had another loose tooth, buddy?" I don't know. It just kind of happened. I put the tooth back under his pillow, telling him to make sure to say something next time, and then I kissed him goodnight and put him to bed. When I went to put the money under his pillow a little later, though, the tooth wasn't there. Instead, there was a coin. I took a look at it, thinking it was a $50, but realized I was wrong almost at once. At first, I thought it was one of those weird chocolate coins you sometimes got for Christmas. Turning it, I realized it was just extremely grubby. It was heavy, like it was made out of brass or copper, and the surface looked dirty, like it had been at the bottom of a well for quite some time. I started to take it with me, something in me wanting to keep it away from my son, but I put it back instead. It wasn't mine, after all, and by the look of it, it was probably something that he treasured. It had been back under his pillow for less than a second before his hand went searching for it. His fingers took hold of it almost greedily as he clutched it, and I decided to take the $1 back with me. Brandon changed a bit after that night, but it's only in retrospect that I see it. He became very secretive not my little buddy like he used to be. Brandon didn't want to play video games in the living room with me anymore. He didn't want to read stories at bedtime either. He spent a lot of time in his room and seemed to be closing off. His mother laughed at me when I told her that my feelings were a little bit hurt by it. He's just being a kid. Kids go through phases sometimes. Don't take it so personally. A couple of months from now, he'll probably be back to his usual self again. I hoped he would, but it was hard to ignore the physical changes that were going on in him as well. Not only was Brandon quieter, but it seemed like he had grown. He hadn't gained a foot in a single week, but sometimes it seemed like his fingers were abnormally long, his arms strangely jointed, and his face was oddly stretched. He would look at me sometimes, look at me like he was thinking about doing something that he knew would make me angry. I didn't like it, but he never did it right out in the open. Like I said, Brandon never came to sit with me or play video games, but I would sometimes catch him peeking at me from the hallway or from under the table in the kitchen. It was creepy, but I figured it was just little kid behavior. A month after Brandon lost his first tooth, I found another one in his backpack. Well, no, not just one. I found 5 hidden in the front pocket of his backpack after he left it on the kitchen table when he went to go to the bathroom. He had become pretty protective of that backpack, putting it in his room or keeping it close by at all times, and I started getting suspicious of what might be in there. I didn't think it was drugs or anything. He was 6, but I thought it might be something weird or dangerous. What if he had a snake or something in there? So when he suddenly ran off to go to the bathroom, I knew this was my chance to have a look. I needed to sign his folder for school anyway, so I took out the folder and looked over the day's report before taking a peek in the pockets. The teeth were just sitting there, bumping together when I poked at them, but they didn't really look like human teeth. They looked more like animal teeth, and they were too strange to have come out of my son's mouth. They might have been from a cat or a dog, I suppose. Maybe a, "What are you doing?" I zipped the backpack and turned around, looking like I'd been caught doing something I shouldn't. "Nothing, just signing your folder." Brandon looked at me with a great deal of mistrust, taking the backpack and going to his room without putting his back to me. I told his mother about the teeth when she came back from work, but she brushed it off again, saying that little kids often collected strange things. "My brothers collected animal skeletons they found in the woods," she said dismissively, as we got ready for bed. "Thank goodness it's just teeth and not a whole skull." I let it go, but it was hard not to see what was going on. Brandon started looking like he wasn't sleeping well. He had huge bags under his eyes, and he was fidgety anytime he was made to sit still, like at dinner or for homework. He would get short and agitated, muttering to himself in a way I couldn't understand. I listened carefully once when he was doing math homework, and it sounded like he was talking in a different language. He looked up when he saw me noticing, squinting at me with that look of distrust, and it broke my heart to see him like that. Brandon had always been my little buddy, and this sudden change in him was painful to watch. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the school. They needed to speak with me about something important. Brandon, it seemed, had been in a fight where he had knocked more than a few of the kids' teeth out. I came down right away, afraid that Brandon had been hurt, but when I saw him sitting in the principal's office, he looked none the worse for wear. He had a bruise on his cheek, and his hands looked like he had beat them against a wall, but he didn't seem injured or in distress at all. Quite the contrary, Brandon looked happier than I had ever seen him. I took a seat next to him in the office, waiting to see what they thought was so important. "We called you in, not because Brandon has been fighting, but because of other rumors going around his class." "Rumors?" I asked. "Yes, sir. The student he fought with said Brandon had been making strange deals with other students." I shook my head, not quite understanding. "What kinds of deals?" "They say he's been buying people's teeth." I shuddered, thinking about the teeth in the bag I'd saw not too long ago. I looked down at Brandon, questioning him with my eyes as to whether it was true. He looked back at me without hesitation, pretty much letting me know that it was. He's been trading his lunch for them. He's been trading other things for them, too. Toys and small things. He's allegedly traded over 20 students for their teeth across 3 grades. Today, the student in question had taken the trade but refused to give him any teeth. Your son responded by beating the teeth out of his mouth. I looked down at Brandon, asking what he was thinking. He didn't bother to answer, just clenched his fists in his lap and looked at the floor. I think that was when it really hit me how much he had changed. The bags under his eyes were dark and deep, and his fingers were long enough that I couldn't see how anyone didn't notice. Each finger seemed twice as long as it should be, and as he clenched, I could see a 4th knuckle on each of them. The reason we called you in, sir, is, well, to get those teeth back. I turned and looked at the principal. What do you mean? He looked a little green as he wiped his forehead with a napkin. We believe your son has the missing teeth, but he won't tell us where they are, and he won't give them back to us. We can't seem to find them, and the mother is hopeful that the dentist can put them back in if they're not too badly damaged. If anything else, they want them back so they can take them to the dentist and make sure they're baby teeth and not permanent. Brandon hasn't said a word about where he put them, and we are deeply troubled by this behavior. I looked at Brandon and asked him where the teeth were. He shook his head, not saying a word. I asked him again, and when he shook his head this time, I heard something. Something nearly indistinguishable, but altogether unsettling. Something was rattling in his mouth. We can sit here until you decide to give us the teeth, but you're not leaving until we get them back. I don't know what's gotten into you, I said, but the idea that we wouldn't be leaving seemed to decide him. He bent slowly over the principal's desk, making eye contact with the older man the whole time as he opened his mouth. 3 teeth fell out as he pushed his tongue out, and none of them appeared to be his. The teeth clattered on the desk like old dice, and more than one of them had a root hanging from them. As he sat back up, I had the sneaking suspicion that he was holding out. The principal, however, seemed more than okay with what he had gotten back. He told us to go, saying that Brandon was suspended for 2 weeks, and I collected up my son as we headed for the door. The principal managed not to vomit before we got out of his office, but it was a near thing. We talked the entire way home. Well, I talked. Brandon just sat there and said nothing. I told him I didn't know what this was about, but that he needed to stop. This wasn't him. This wasn't like him, and he needed to tell me what was going on so I could help. I was his dad. I wanted to help him, but I couldn't help him if he didn't talk to me. The whole time he just sat there and stared at me. Most kids who are being chastised look out the window or look at their feet, but he stared directly at me in brazen defiance. His fingers kept flexing, and I saw him put a hand to his pocket more than once. I wanted to tell him to turn them out, to give me the tooth from that kid that he had kept, but something in me didn't quite dare. I was loath to admit it, but I was a little bit afraid of my son in that moment. He looked nothing like the boy that I had known for almost 7 years. My grandma used to tell me stories about babies taken by fairies and the changelings they left behind. This reminded me of those stories. The kid in front of me was so fundamentally different from the one I knew that it was almost like talking to a different person. As we pulled up in the yard, I told him he was grounded. No tablet, no TV, no dessert. But Brandon didn't seem to care. He just walked inside and went to his room. His tablet was still on the charger, and his TV remote was left hanging off the door to his room. I didn't know what he was doing in there, but it clearly wasn't playing. He was way too quiet, and when his mother called to tell me that she was working a double, I almost cried. I didn't want to be alone with him for longer than I had to be, and that made me feel even worse. He didn't come out for dinner, and when I went to bring him a plate a little while later, I heard muffled voices as he spoke to someone. I tried to get the teeth, but they caught me. I didn't know who he was talking to. Kind of thought he might be talking to himself, but when a gruff voice responded, I felt my stomach drop. "You'll just have to do better next time." The voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was deep and watery, like something from the bottom of a well, and it spoke in a way that made its mouth sound strangely full. It was devoid of any sort of kindness or charity, the sounds you sometimes hear when people speak to children. It was an authoritative voice, a teacher, and they were not pleased with my son. "I'm grounded. They suspended me from school. I'm not going to be able to get you any teeth for at least 2 weeks." "Your father has teeth," it said matter-of-factly. "Your mother has teeth too." When he answered, he didn't sound afraid. When he answered, it was with cold assuredness. "They won't just give them to me. They don't understand what I'm doing." What was he doing? That's what I wanted to know. I gripped the doorknob, hoping they wouldn't hear me, and that was when the voice said something that made my blood run cold. "Then do not ask them. Take them, like you did from the boy today." I opened the door in one fluid motion, and my son looked up guiltily as I walked into the room. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. "No one," he said, much too quickly. "I heard someone," I said. "I heard someone in here talking to you, and I want to know who it was and where they went." That was a lie. I didn't think I wanted to know who they were. What I wanted was for them to never come back. The person had sounded like some kind of demonic fairy from a kid's story, and I was afraid of what I would see if he did come back. "It's nothing," Brandon said quickly. Too quickly. I was doing voices." I talked to him for a little while longer, but I got nothing. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't tell me anything, and eventually I just left. I should have left it at that. I should have just left it alone. But I had to try one more time. It was late, about 10:30, which is pretty late for us, and I decided to try a peace offering. I felt pretty certain he was still awake. I had heard something moving around in there, so I cut some of the pie I had made to go with dinner and walked to his room. I was going to offer him the pie and see if maybe we could talk. I just wanted to know what it was that had made him change so much. Most of all, I just wanted my son back. It killed me to have him act like this, but as the door came open, I got more answers than I had bargained for. It was standing over his bed, its arm going under his pillow, and in the darkness of his room, I realized it had to be what he'd been talking to. The pie fell to the ground, but I had a death grip on the plate. I realized later I had sprained my thumb once I was in any state to feel anything. I didn't speak. I could barely breathe, and as the thing turned to look at me, I realized my fairy theory might not be too far off. It was grubby looking, like something that's been living in a ditch. Its features were completely covered in something dark that had the texture of earth, except for the two large lamp-like eyes that protruded from its face like bubble lights. It was tall, something I realized as it took its full height. It had been crouched before, putting something under my son's pillow, and it had to stoop so as not to bang its head on the ceiling, which was about 9 feet from the floor. From its back, 4 insectile wings protruded. They weren't large enough to carry it, but they were large enough to be noticeable. Its hands and arms, the fingers multi-jointed, were far from delicate looking as it wiggled them ceaselessly. I expected it to charge me. I expected it to attack me, but Instead, it raised one huge finger to its face and made a shushing sound. "Shh! You'll wake the baby," it whispered, and its mouth sounded like it was trying to swallow something. Then it smiled, and I saw not a double, but a triple row of teeth inside its mouth. There's no order to them. Molars next to canines, next to bicuspids, next to what appear to be fangs and shark teeth. Its mouth is such a mishmash of teeth, it's impossible not to feel a little woozy when you look at it. It pulled its lips down, somehow containing all those teeth, and before my eyes, it vanished. My son was pretty upset when I grabbed him and carried him out of the house. I put him in the car and we waited till his mother got off work before taking him to a nearby motel. I told her what I'd seen as best I could, and I think she believed there might be something going on now. My son is furious, saying that he needs to get back home so he can do his job, but he won't say what that is. Honestly, I think he's been collecting teeth for whatever that thing was. When I went back inside to get some clothes and check the house, I looked under his pillow and found another one of those strange coins. There's a box under his bed, too, and inside it's equal parts teeth and coins. There are around 20 of them, and they're sitting next to teeth of every shape and every size. Most of them are animal teeth, but some of them are definitely human teeth. I've taken the entire box with me, but the phone call I got from my wife before I left the house was what really worried me. She called to tell me that our son had locked himself in the bathroom, and she was afraid he was hurting himself. There's a weird squelching noise, followed by him yelling and crying. He'd locked himself in the bathroom, but I went to the manager to unlock it for us. What we found in there will stick with me for a long time. We're at the hospital now. My wife is in the ER room with him while I sit in the waiting room and wait for updates. Protocol states only one parent can go in at a time, and my son doesn't want me to go in there. He can't speak very well, but he made that very clear to my wife. I gave him space, not wanting to exacerbate his condition any more than I have to. I've got the box on my lap as I sit out here, and I'm not really sure what to do with it. Inside are the 8 teeth that he managed to pull out of his own head before we got him restrained. Whatever this creature is, it must get its due, and my son is apparently intent on giving it that due. We'll probably end up having to take him to a mental facility, but I know he isn't crazy. I saw that thing too, and I know it'll find him no matter where we take him. So be careful when you tell your kids about the tooth fairy. What comes to collect their teeth might be something far worse than even you can imagine.
Ugh. That part where he opens his mouth and the teeth come out, God, that always squeebs me out a little. Moving right along, though, let's go to another very cherished part of childhood when it comes to schools. We all enjoy our time spent out on the playground, and we all enjoy hearing about stories maybe told under the bleachers or under the slide, horrifying tales or urban legends, things too dark to be told in the light of the sun. So, let's hear a story about playground tales.
And when she came out of the bathroom, her entire class was gone. The 3rd grade class of 77 was never seen again, but they say sometimes you can still hear laughter in the woods outside. The door opened, and we all covered our eyes as Reggie grinned in at us. "I knew you guys would be telling stories again. You should have waited." Becky sighed. Randall chuffed unhappily, and I tried to smile as I told Reggie to close the door before someone saw him. We were in the old equipment storage shed by the playfield, and if an adult saw us, they would make us get out. We like to tell scary stories. The scarier the locale, the better. The old equipment shed had been unanimously decided upon because A, it was home to a lot of creepy crawlies, and B, it didn't let in a lot of light. We had to keep finding new places to tell stories because the ones we had got old pretty quick. You can tell stories in a place for only so long before it stops being scary, but also, sometimes it was because the teachers chased us out. The third reason was stepping in right now and grinning like a shot fox at us. Reggie was the weird kid of PS24, and he had earned that title honestly. It wasn't just because he was overweight to the point of being a blob, and it wasn't just because his hair was full of thick, gross-looking dandruff. It wasn't just because his dad was the janitor and seemed to love the job, or because he ate sauerkraut and onion sandwiches for lunch. The reason was that Reggie just emanated an aura of unsettledness. I got the feeling about him that I got about certain adults or dogs, the ones your parents tell you to stay away from. Reggie had a feeling of danger, of not rightness about him, and it made me uneasy. It didn't help that he had adopted us as his best friends this year. Becky, Randall, and I had been friends since kindergarten, but we had managed to avoid getting too close to Reggie. That had lasted until 4th grade, when we were in Miss Novak's class together. Reggie had decided that we were his best friends. He didn't have any regular friends, and he adopted us as his. This led to a year of smelling his sandwiches at lunch, having him follow us on our playground games, and listening to his wheezy, resting breath as he sat in our pod in class. We had hoped that we would be rid of him at the end of the year, but when our parents had signed us up for summer school care, a kind of after-school care during the summer, we had groaned as Reggie came in and saw us. He explained that the school had agreed to let him attend for free if his dad worked through the summer, and we all prayed that he would be in a different 5th grade class than us when next year rolled around. "Well, since you've already started telling stories, I got a good one," Reggie said. "It's the tale of the skinned raccoon." Reggie started to lay out his story about a skinned raccoon that had been seen one night while his dad worked late, and we all tried to pretend that it wasn't the most gruesome thing we had ever heard. The way he described the raccoon made me think that he had not only really seen it, but that he had probably skinned it himself. He said it had left little red footprints on the floor as it walked away, and his father had been angry when he found them. "We followed them all the way to the woods, but we never did find the raccoon." We all made an appreciatively scared noise, but I think we were all just hoping that he would let us move on. When Mrs. Simon pushed the door open a moment later, telling us this was off limits and we needed to leave, it was almost a relief. We left the shed, trying to kind of lose Reggie as we did, but we knew he'd find us again. It was impossible to hide from Reggie. He knew everywhere and everything about the school, all the hidden nooks and crannies. His dad had keys to any door in the school, and Reggie often borrowed some of them to get into places he shouldn't. His dad always covered for him, for some reason, so he never got in any trouble. It's weird, it was like his dad was scared of him sometimes. But he was a grown-up, and there was no reason that he should have been afraid of him. As we left the shed, running into the sunshine of the triple-digit day, Reggie said something that caught my interest. "That's a shame. I was going to tell you guys about how I saw the missing kids a few nights ago." The missing kids. That was a big topic of discussion these days. Last year, 4 kids had gone missing from PS24. A 1st grader named Mary Edwards, a 3rd grader named George Tate, a kindergartner named Savannah Marcus, and a 5th grader named Robbie Fust. They had come to school and then just never left. The cameras at the school left a lot to be desired. That's what my dad said anyway, and they hadn't seen the kids leave school by any of the other exits either. My dad works for the police department, and he told me I needed to be extra safe until they found whoever was doing this. They suspected a teacher, but the question was, how would they get the kids out? If they were hiding the kids in the school somehow, then they would have been found by now, wouldn't they? They had searched the school a bunch. The disappearance had hung about the school like ghosts, and it sounded like the teachers were afraid that they might lose their job if it kept happening. I thought about what he had said until after lunch and decided I would just have to ask him. We were playing outside, the day a little cooler now that the sun was heading towards down, and Reggie was leaning against the fence and watching people as he often did. Reggie liked to just sit there and look at people, watching them as they went past, but he didn't make up stories about them or anything. He just watched them like the animals in the zoo watch fat kids. It was really weird. "So Reggie," I said, and Becky and Randall looked surprised since we never really talked to him and just accepted when he talked at us. "What do you mean that you were going to tell us about the missing kids?" Reggie turned his gaze away from a first grader who was chasing a ball with some effort, and his grin was downright predatory. "Oh yeah, I saw them the other night when Dad was working late." "Like you saw them, I said. "Like you know where they are." "Well, yeah," Reggie said. "They're under the school." I looked at Becky and Randall, and the two of them now looked as interested as I was. "Why haven't you told anyone?" Reggie shrugged. "No one asked." I could have smacked myself in the forehead. "Well, can you take us there?" Reggie was already grinning like a creepypasta monster, but I saw a glimmer pass over his eye, and I should have known to take it back. He wanted to show us. He wanted us to come with him, and I suddenly didn't want to go. But it didn't really matter if I wanted to or not. If there was a chance I could help my dad find those kids, I wanted to. Dad was worried about losing his job too if they didn't find somebody, and I didn't want that to happen. "Yeah, I'll show you. Come on." Reggie looked over at Mrs. Simon and Mrs. Gay to make sure they weren't paying attention, and the four of us headed towards the school. Reggie led us into a side door, through the third-grade hallway, and to the middle of the school to an area called the Square. The Square had been a part of PS24 since it was built in the 70s. It's an area of grass with a couple of small trees growing there. How the roots don't mess up the school, I don't know, but it's a place that a lot of kids usually go to between classes. There's a utility building in the middle of it, and that was where Reggie took us. He pulled out a long key from his short pants and unlocked the door, ushering us into the little building before closing us into total darkness. Then he pulled the chain on a light hanging from the ceiling, and we were left looking around a small square room of tools and other implements. "There's no one here," Becky said, looking around before looking back at Reggie with a scared look. "Well, yeah," Reggie said, grabbing an edge of what turned out to be a carpet. "Otherwise, they would have found them by now." He pulled the carpet back and revealed a hatch in the floor. It was flush against the ground, with no wheel or handle to poke out, and if you didn't know it was there, you would never even see the rug. Reggie squeezed a pair of handles and pulled the hatch up to reveal a ladder that led down into the earth. Reggie started climbing down like he'd done it 1,000 times before, and when he saw that we weren't following, he asked us if we were coming. "They're down here. If you want to see them, then you'll have to come down," he said, making his way down again as if the matter was settled. I looked at Randall, but he just shook his head and went for the door. "No way, man. This is way too weird for me." He put a hand on the knob, but when he turned it, the door was locked. I went to look for the flip lock that would let us out, but the other side of the knob had a keyhole. I'd never seen anything like this, and I realized that Reggie had the only key to the door. We were locked in with him, for better or worse, and he would need to let us out again. I looked at the hole and figured it beat being stuck in here. At least, we might find another way out if we went down. We descended the ladder slowly, the darkness thick around us. I tried turning on the light on my watch so we could see a little, but it didn't provide much light. We spread out, trying to find a switch, and when the light suddenly came on, I jumped. We were in a big room, like a storage unit, and it stretched the length of the grassy area above us. The ceiling was metal, the walls were metal, the floor was concrete, and the place was full of boxes. They were stacked up to the ceiling in some places, and I wondered what this place had been before it was just here to store things. We grouped up, moving around as we checked the room, and I saw something speckled on the floor. It looked like someone had spilled juice, or maybe paint, and as we came around a big stack of boxes, I saw another door. This one wasn't locked, and as it came open, we saw that it led down a long hallway that went further into the underground. "What is this place, anyway?" Becky asked, sounding a little scared as we followed the tunnel. "I'm not sure," Randall said, "but my mom told me that she used to go here back in the early 80s, and people used to talk about there being bomb shelters or something under the school. She never saw them, but she said that was something the other kids told stories about." "You think that's what these are?" I asked, seeing a door coming up on our left. Randall shrugged. "Maybe, I guess. It would make sense for it to be in the very middle of the school." We tried the door, but it was locked tight. The next 3 were also locked, but the 5th door opened pretty easily and held what we were looking for. Well, not exactly what we were looking for, but we found the missing kids. The room had been some kind of workroom that had been turned into just another storage room. The boxes that the kids were lying on were drenched in blood. They were dead, thankfully. If they hadn't been, they would have been screaming. They were naked, their clothes lying in rags, and someone had been very busy. Their arms and legs had been removed, the bones broken cruelly. Their stomachs had been opened, their entrails hanging around them like snakes, and a few of them were missing eyes. The little girl, Mary, I thought, had her jaw pulled off and her tongue was missing. Becky started throwing up. Randall sounded like he wanted to scream, and when someone started laughing, I knew we'd stumbled into a trap. It was Reggie, his bulk blocking the door. He had a knife, the long kind you found in a kitchen, and he was grinning like a creep again. He just kept standing there, not trying to come after us, and it was clear that he realized, like we had, that we weren't going anywhere. "Looks like you found the lost kids. Guess it's time to add 3 more to my little collection." "Come on, Reggie," I said, trying to talk our way out of this. This isn't funny. You got us pretty good with these Halloween decorations, but enough's enough. You win. Just let us out so we can..." When he slashed me across my chest, slicing a long red line that split my t-shirt and my skin beneath, I hissed in pain and stumbled back. "There's no getting out now. You're staying here forever. I meant to get you all before school ended, but there was never a good opportunity. Now, we can be friends forever. All 8 of us." I was scared, but Randall had clearly gone past scared. He screamed like a cat that's been stomped on and ran at Reggie, shoving him as the big boy stabbed him in the shoulder. Even though he got him, Reggie was still off balance. He fell into some of the boxes, and we scattered. Randall had gone back the way we came, Becky running after him, but I knew there was no way out that way. I went left, running into the unknown, and when someone roared like an angry beast behind me, I charged heedlessly. I don't know how long I ran. I don't know how far I ran, but when I slammed into a ladder, it was hard enough to make my eyes blur. I shook myself as I started to climb. I couldn't let him catch me. If he caught me, I'd be dead. I climbed and climbed and climbed, and when I got to the top, I pushed at the hatch and almost screamed when it wouldn't move. I pushed and pushed, getting a little bit of give, but it always came back down again. I couldn't make it budge, not even a little bit, and as I shoved at it, I started hearing something down the tunnel behind me. It wasn't loud, not like someone running, but it was feet coming up the concrete. I screamed and shoved at the hatch, feeling it give but not open. I squinted as something fell on my face, dirt or something, and I had to brace my back against the wall so I could use both hands. I got brief flashes of light as I shoved, just the slight glimmer from the edges, and when I heard the laughter from the bottom of the ladder, I kept shoving, praying to God to help me. "Found you," Reggie sing-songed, putting his foot on the bottom rung of the ladder. "You might as well just come down. That hatch doesn't open. I don't know where it comes out at, but it's not gonna help you. He started climbing, and I felt like crying as I shoved at the hatch. My arms were hurting almost as badly as my chest, and I was afraid that he would get me before the latch could open. He would cut my legs, and I'd fall down the ladder. Then he'd do whatever he wanted, probably drag me back to his little room and finish me off. I shoved and shoved, yelling for help as he got closer and closer. He was climbing slow, on purpose, really stretching it out, and his words were muffled by the knife that he held in his teeth. Scream all you like. No one is coming to help. But we both squinted when the hatch came slowly open, and I saw the faces of about 7 or 8 kids I recognized from the program. They helped me out, yelling for a teacher as Reggie retreated down the ladder. They had seen him, though. They knew he had been down there, and as the teachers came running, I was lying on the grass and breathing heavily. I was in a corner of the field, the back corner by the utility shed, and the kids had been playing kickball when they heard a loud shrieking noise that had come from that direction. It was the hinges on the door, long ago grown over with grass and covered with dirt. They came over and saw it opening and closing, and when they heard me yelling, they came to help pull me out. The group of them had managed to fling it open, and Mrs. Simons was running to see what they were talking about. I breathed a sigh of relief. I told them what had happened, told them how Becky and Randall were still down there, and Mrs. Simons sent someone to call the police, but wouldn't go down there herself. If what you're saying is true, then it would be dangerous for us to go down there until the police get here. They came pretty quick, my dad with them, and I told them the story again and begged them to save my friends before he hurt them. They went down the ladder, guns drawn and flashlights out, and my dad and another officer told me to take them to the shed that Reggie had brought us down from. I took him there, but the door was standing open, and I knew that Reggie had fled. Dad went down the ladder, and to my relief came up with Becky and Randall. They were scared, but unharmed. They told us how Reggie had come running for the front door and climbed up while they hid behind some boxes. They said he hadn't even noticed them as they ran, and he seemed pretty scared. They took the bodies out in bags, and the whole place was covered in tape. They got Reggie's dad, too, and he told them how he had known there was something off about his son, but he hadn't known what it was. I know it's not right to be afraid of your kid, but I was really afraid that he would kill me one night. The police decided he hadn't had anything to do with it, though I heard the school fired him for knowingly letting Reggie take his keys and get into restricted areas. As for Reggie, no one knows what happened to him. Wherever he ran to, he was never seen again. Now the ghost stories around school are about Reggie and how he's just waiting for his next chance to kill more kids. If they'd been down there in those tunnels that day, if they'd had stood face to face with the psycho while he contemplated killing us, they might not be so quick to tell stories about him.
One more story, and I think I've saved a pretty good one for last. Another aspect of many classes are their projects, their history papers, their family trees, their genealogy studies, and of course, we have programs like the Flat Stanley Project. So, let's hear a horrifying little tale of my own concoction that centers around the Flat Stanley Project and why it was no longer allowed at a certain school.
Did anyone else become a participant in the social experiment known as Flat Stanley? I went to elementary school in the mid-90s, 95 to 2001, and I was in the 3rd grade when our teacher announced that we would be taking part in the Flat Stanley Project. For those of you unfamiliar with the concept, Flat Stanley was a series of books about a flat kid who goes on all kinds of weird adventures to famous places. New York, the Grand Canyon, France, Australia. This guy went everywhere and was like a flat version of Curious George. We started reading them in class, making them part of our English hour, and one day, Mrs. Gazzle told us that we were going to have a contest. Today's English lesson is to create your own flat Stanley. It can look however you want, but the winner of the contest will get 3 prizes from the prize basket and will be the class's flat Stanley that we send into the world to participate in the Flat Stanley project. We were all excited. This was a chance to see our work in pictures that would come back, not to mention get some cool stuff out of the prize basket. We all drew out our own concepts for Flat Stanley and set to work coloring and designing him. My Flat Stanley was a spy, wearing a big trench coat and a wide hat and carrying binoculars. He wore his regular clothes under it, and he just looked so goofy that I thought I had a real chance of winning. My friend Todd laughed when he glanced over at it, telling me it was cool. His Flat Stanley was a football player for the Georgia Bulldogs, his favorite team, and I thought his Flat Stanley looked cool too. So when the class voted on the displayed Stanleys, I figured Kaylee's Flat Stanley would win. It had a sparkly tiara and a ball gown she had made with felt. That was the one that I voted for, at least, since you couldn't vote for your own. And if not hers, I figured Matt's would win. His Flat Stanley was a truck driver, complete with a net hat and a sleeveless t-shirt, and he'd put a lot of work into it. I knew some kids might find mine funny, but I never figured I stood a chance. I hadn't used any special materials or done anything really innovative, and I figured I'd hang him in my room when I got home. So when Miss Gazzle announced that my Flat Stanley had won, I was shocked. I went home that night with a new bounce ball, a pocket-sized Stretch Armstrong, and an eraser shaped like a Pikachu. I also went home to tell my mom that I had won the contest and that my Flat Stanley would be going out to other schools and other places, so we could get pictures back and see all the cool places that he had been. She said that sounded really neat, and we brainstormed where he might end up. Paris, Disneyland, the moon. We both laughed at that one, and maybe even at an Atlanta Braves baseball game. We had a good afternoon thinking about where he might end up, and when Dad got home, he joined us in our daydream. I went to bed that night, thinking about all the cool places Stanley might go, and what we might see when he came back. It started out pretty normal. Mrs. Gazzle sent the package out to a school the next town over, and they sent us back pictures a week later. Stanley had been to a volleyball game, an art museum, and finally to a play put on by the class. They sent him up the road to the next school, where Stanley went on a hike, went to the zoo, and then went to a baseball game. It wasn't the Atlanta Braves, but it was a t-ball game, and that was still pretty neat. This went on for a couple of months, Flat Stanley traveling to Texas, New Mexico, California, Idaho, and Kansas. We hung the pictures up, sent out thank you cards, and talked about the places that Flat Stanley had gone. It was a good time, and we used it for our geography class to help us learn the states. It seemed that Flat Stanley was in all our lessons that year. Math, if Flat Stanley travels from Burbank, California to El Paso, Texas, how far has he traveled? Geography, if Flat Stanley is at the Alamo, then where is he? And of course, English, where we read the books and the letters that we got back out loud. It was approaching April when we came to class to find that Miss Gazzle wasn't there. We were all pretty bummed because Wednesdays were usually when we got our Flat Stanley letters, and the sub told us that Miss Gazzle would talk to us about it when she got back. There was no Flat Stanley that day, and when Miss Gazzle came back the following week, we moved on to something else. All the Flat Stanley stuff had disappeared from the class, and its absence was as noticeable as our missing teacher had been. She never told us what had happened, and it was a mystery talked about in hushed tones well into the 4th grade. It would probably still be a mystery if I hadn't decided a decade later to pursue teaching. I'm in my 2nd year of college now, and I've progressed into student teaching. I decided that I wanted to try my hand at being an elementary school teacher, something like 4th or 5th grade, and when they gave me the name of my mentor, I realized I knew her. It was Miss Gazzle, my old 3rd grade teacher. She taught 5th grade now, her retirement coming up on the horizon, and she smiled when she realized who I was, giving me a big hug. "Welcome back. I'm glad to see you decided to take up teaching." Her classroom was in the same room her 3rd grade class had been in, and the kids reminded me a lot of me and my friends when we were her students. They were a good group. They were hungry to learn, and they liked her a lot. Miss Gazel was the kind of teacher that kept kids' attention effortlessly, and I hoped it was a skill that I could learn from her. The kiddos in her class took to me pretty quickly, and soon I was teaching classes while Miss Gazel just sat back and observed. Something about being in her class again made me remember my days as a third grader at this school, and that made me think about Flat Stanley. There was nothing like that in her fifth grade class. The kids would have probably thought it was babyish, but it did rekindle some of the mystery I had felt from a decade before. I tried to find a good time to bring it up, but nothing seemed to present itself. Until Friday, on my second week. I was packing up to leave when Miss Gazel offered to take me out for some drinks. I was a little surprised, and she must have noticed because she laughed airily at my look of chagrin. "What, you didn't know teachers drank?" she said, her coat over one arm. I decided to join her and found a small group of other teachers waiting for us when we arrived. Some of them I knew, some of them I didn't, but it turned out that this was a regular thing for them. They drank and talked about their week, complained about some students who were especially difficult, and generally blew off steam. Mrs. Gazel and I sat in the corner, nodding and listening to them, and she smiled at me over the lip of her fourth glass of wine sometime near 11. "I've been sending glowing reviews to your professor," she confided. "You're one of the better student teachers I've ever worked with. I think you're probably a shoo-in to be hired at the end of your training period, and I'll recommend you to the principal myself, if he doesn't extend you a position." I thanked her, sipping my second beer as I took it all in. "Hey, can I ask you something?" I said suddenly. "Neither of us are drunk enough for you to offer me a ride home yet, big fella," she said, snorting into her glass. No, nothing like that. Something always bugged me from my time in your class, and I was wondering if you remember the Flat Stanley project we did." Some of the color fled from her cheeks, and I could swear that she shuddered a little. "I'm surprised you even remember that. It was a long time ago." "Well, everything disappeared from the class so quickly, and when you came back, you never brought it up again. All the books were gone from the class library. All the letters were gone. Everything was missing. I think we talked about it for half of the fourth grade before something else caught our attention." She looked far away for a moment, as if contemplating whether she actually wanted to answer me or not. "I think I need a little air. Would you care to escort me?" I told her I would, and we left amidst a hail of catcalls about cradle robbers and cougars on the prowl. I'd taken her arm, and she was trying to be unbothered by it, but she was stiff and a little unsteady as we walked out onto the patio. Something had her spooked, and I didn't think it was the half-hearted teasing from her peers. When we came outside, she leaned against the railing outside the seating area, looking at the waves as they crashed against the water below us. I came to lean beside her, realizing she was trying to figure out how to begin, and having trouble getting started. "Are you sure you want to know? That's a pretty messed up story, but I suppose we could count it as a part of your education. Maybe it'll help you avoid something that got me in a lot of hot water and canceled the Flat Stanley project for the whole school." I told her I did, pretty intrigued with what could have happened to make a whole school ban something as benign as a kid's art project. "Well, you remember that we sent the little guy around to the school the next town over? Well, then they sent it to another school, and that school sent it to another school, and so on and so forth. We had about the best results out of any of the classes, getting back about twice as much material as is normal. I started integrating it into the curriculum, as you remember, and it was such a huge part of our class. I appreciated the material. Sometimes it's hard to keep kids' attention when they're that young, but Stanley really helped. Then one day, I arrived to find a new package had come the day before." She stopped, shivering a little as she watched the waves. "Someone had sent our Flat Stanley back, and I was excited as I opened the envelope. We were starting fractions that day. At least we were supposed to, and I wanted to see if there was some way I could work fractions into the package. I would get my wish, but not in the way I wanted. I had reached into my pocket for a cigarette, and Miss Gazel asked if she could have one. I had never seen her smoke before, but as she inhaled that first mouthful, she closed her eyes and looked euphoric. Flat Stanley was supposed to go to Carter Wild Elementary School in Boise, but it appeared he had gone somewhere else. You're too young to remember it, but there was a pretty terrible person in the Midwest in the late 90s. He was picking up young women who were hitchhiking. The police would find them later after he was done with them. Somehow, he got our Flat Stanley and thought it would be funny to use him to taunt the police. He had murdered 5 girls that week. Her voice broke as she said it, the tip of the cigarette jittering as she spoke, and attached pictures of them to the Stanley he sent back. They were horrific, and as I spilled them out of my desk, I recognized what I had at once. She was shaking, and as I put my jacket around her, she smiled ruefully at me. "You're a good kid, despite making me relive this. We knew that the kids in my class had all kinds of weird ideas about what had happened, but we also knew that none of you knew the truth." She took a long pull off the cigarette and let the ash dribble down. "The first girl in the pictures was Ashley Manx. He had cut her chest open, the X going right between her breasts, and skinned her open like some kind of flower. Her face was set in the worst possible look you've ever seen, and right there in the middle of her chest was Flat Stanley. Your Flat Stanley. I thought I got it then, but Miss Gazel hadn't even gotten rolling yet. Then there was Frances Carmichael, the girl he took from the fair. She was looking for a ride, and he gave her one. He cut her arms and legs off while she was alive, burning the wounds closed with an iron so she'd bleed out slowly. Finally, he cut her throat, and after that, he put 1 foot from that Flat Stanley in her teeth and took a picture. He was standing upright, her body on display, and her burnt nubs are something I still can't quite get out of my head. I'm sorry, I started, but she cut me off. No, you wanted to know, so let me get it out. It's like the confessional I used to go to when I was little. If I get it all out, maybe it won't haunt me as bad. He got Dawn Cambridge and Betsy Cambridge next, split their backs, and made a pair of blood angels out of them. He set Flat Stanley in the middle of them, the crevice between their sides, and snapped a picture. They were still looking for them when they found Ashley. Finally, he got Melanie Fasterly, and she was probably the worst. He beat her with a sledgehammer until her bones were like glass shards. The picture he sent back was unrecognizable as a human being. If it hadn't been for the hair, I would never have known what it was. He stood the cutout between her lumpy legs as if to save her modesty, and she honestly looked about as flat as he was, if you don't count all the bone spurs sticking out of her. Mrs. Gazel was shaking, the shivering causing her to stutter over the last few words, and when she looked back at me, there was regret on her face. All the alcohol had been burned out of her, the fear having shaken it loose as her mind remembered what was likely the worst day of her life. I called the police, of course I did, but my real concern was for you guys. If this psycho had mailed this back to us, then he had the address of the school. If he knew where you were, then he could pay us a visit and make us his next photo collage, and I couldn't have lived with myself if that had happened. So I gave the police everything, and they agreed to keep an eye on the school for a while. I needn't have bothered. The twisted fuck had a particular hunting ground and a particular prey, neither of which were children in Georgia. He never did pay us a visit, but it took 6 more girls before they caught him. I didn't sleep well until they had him in custody, and I didn't sleep soundly until they slipped the needle into his arm last year. He was a rotten, twisted individual, and he deserved every ounce of what he got. I had to take the rest of the week off to recover from his little present, and there was talk that they might want me to undergo counseling. When I got back, the school had scrapped all that Flat Stanley stuff. It was too much of a risk that some student would get a hold of it next. And they couldn't have that. Some of the teachers thought we should tell the students. Some of them thought we should tell the parents, and a few of them thought that I should be fired for some reason. It was decided that we wouldn't tell any of them, and we would never speak of it again. In exchange for not causing an uproar, I got to keep my job. I thought it was a pretty fitting trade back then. So that's the whole sad story. Cure your curiosity? It did. Mrs. Gazel was right, too. They offered me a job at the end of my training, and it turned out it was her job. Mrs. Gazel retired at the end of the year, wanting to spend more time with her grandkids and her daughters. We still get drinks sometimes, and she really is a lovely woman. As for me, I noticed one major part of the contract that I was presented with. They put it in bold so you couldn't possibly miss it, so if you break it, you really only have yourself to blame. Under no circumstances will our students participate in any program that sends documents to other schools or entities without the express permission of administration. This includes pen pal programs, Hands Across the Water, the Flat Stanley Project, and other affiliated projects there within. I signed that contract 10 years ago, and now I instruct student teachers myself. In the decade I've been teaching, I've never broken that rule, and I have Mrs. Gazel's story to thank for that. When you send something like that out into the world, you never know who might answer back, and what they might have to say.
And just like that, our stories are over for another day. But don't be sad. I'm sure we'll see each other again very soon for more Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.